Welcome to another Kpler Insight webinar, where today we're going to be running through the outlook for LNG and natural gas markets over the upcoming summer season. My name is Laura Page and I head up LNG and natural gas research at Kpler. And I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, JP Lacouture, who looks after all of our Americas gas analysis, and also Ronald Pinto, who looks after all of our European gas content as well. Before I get started with the agenda today, I just wanted to do a little shout out about an event that we're hosting in London, if we go to the next slide. So this event is going to be a breakfast briefing that we're holding on the 29th of April, and we're going to be covering all things European power related. So if you're interested in those markets and would like to attend, please just use the QR code here to register, and we'd love to see you there. Next slide. So the agenda and the plan for today is quite a lot. We've got lots of things that we want to cover with you all today. We're going to start off by just doing a check-in with the markets and look at how the winter season fared for the LNG markets. And then we're going to be running through our base case views on the market for this coming summer season. So looking at LNG supply, LNG demand, and also European gas fundamentals as well. We'll then spend some time at the end of today's presentation looking at the risks to the market balance. So lots of risks that we need to be paying attention to as we go through the summer season, including the potential for Russian gas to come back, looking at tariffs and the impact on GDP, and also, of course, temperature sensitivities as well. We hope to leave time this afternoon for some Q&As as well. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the box below, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can at the end of today's presentation. So if we go on to the next slide, this is where we're going to be looking at what happened over the winter heating season that has just passed us. And all of the data that we're showing today, or at least all of the Kpler data that we're showing, is for the 6-month period from October 2024. So everything from October through to March of 2025. And if we go on to the next slide, you can see that global LNG supply during the winter that has just passed us actually fell. So we saw a 0.6 million tonne decrease in global LNG exports to 215.6 million tonnes on a year-over-year basis. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see lots of different variations across the countries. So on the positive side, we did see the United States adding more supply to the market, around 2.5 million tonnes of supply this winter compared to the previous winter. And that's due to new projects coming online, particularly the Plaquemines project, which started exporting in December. We also saw higher supply from Qatar, and we've seen that particularly over the past couple of weeks because Qatar didn't take its spring shoulder season maintenance, as we've been talking about a lot in our LNG and natural gas weekly report as well. Also higher supply from Malaysia as well. The Bintulu plant has been getting additional feed gas supply, so we've seen increased utilisation rates there to support supply in the Pacific Basin. But of course, not all countries are growing their supply, and there are some areas where we did see supply slipping, particularly in Australia, where we've seen some feed gas issues at plants, and we've also seen some unplanned outages over the winter heating season. In Algeria, there was really weak exports during the start of the year in January and February due to quite a tight domestic gas balance, but also Algeria really prioritising pipeline exports to buyers in Spain and Italy as well. And of course, in Egypt, we did not see Egypt exporting any cargoes due to very low domestic gas production there. And in fact, Egypt has flipped from an exporter to an importer, which we'll be discussing a little bit later. So if we move on to the next slide, we're now going to look at what happened in Northeast Asia during the winter heating season. And actually, Northeast Asia had quite weak fundamentals over the winter heating season, and we saw LNG imports falling back by about 4.5 million tonnes in total. Now, in Japan and South Korea, temperatures were relatively in line with seasonal norms, but we saw this really interesting trend in northern China where Beijing witnessed its mildest winter on record, which really weighed on gas demand in the country. And when we combine that with the fact that China's really been trying to push its domestic gas production, and also it's been pulling more pipeline imports in from Russia due to the Power of Siberia 1 pipeline now being at contractual capacity, this has really taken a hit on LNG. So you can see China reducing its LNG imports on a year-over-year basis. LNG demand was also weaker in Japan and South Korea, but this is mainly being driven by the fact that nuclear power availability has been quite strong. So particularly in Japan, where we've seen restarts of plants that were idled after the Fukushima disaster. And in South Korea, this is more new nuclear capacity coming online, and also less planned maintenance on the fleet as well. If we go over to the next slide, here we're looking at what happened in Europe, because of course the opposite was true in Europe. We saw quite tight fundamentals in Europe over the winter heating season, and overall gas demand rose by about 8% winter on winter. Now, this was partly driven by the fact that temperatures were colder. So you can see here HDDs in many European cities were above even the 5 and the 10-year averages in some cases. So that really boosted residential and commercial gas demand. But in the power sector, we saw a really interesting trend this winter where we saw periods of very low wind power generation. So we've seen gas coming in to back up that low renewable generation. So gas demand was definitely higher, but we also had a supply hit. And this was something that Kpler has been talking about for some time. We were expecting this to happen, which was the loss of Russian pipeline gas via Ukraine on the 1st of January when the transit agreement between Russia and Ukraine ended. So we lost about 15 BCM per year of supply, which has really hit some of those Central and Eastern European countries. Next slide. So when we look at what happened fundamentally in Europe, Europe's been really drawing down its gas storages over the winter heating season. And we ended winter on the 31st of March with storages at about 34% full. Now that's 11% below the 5-year average and a whopping 25% below the levels seen in the previous winter. So really the race is on now to start restocking inventories as we start even looking forward to the next winter heating season. And there are some countries which are facing quite low stocks at the moment versus the 5-year average. In particular here, we're looking at places like Germany, Netherlands, Italy, and Austria as well. So lots of restocking to do over the summer season. If we go on to the next slide, here we're going to start looking at the upcoming summer season and whether we will have more LNG supply availability to help Europe in its restocking efforts. And before I get on to the slide, just to say all of our summer forecasts are for the period April of this year to September of this year as well. So a 6-month period. Next slide. And if we look at our LNG supply forecast at the moment, we do update these monthly, but at the moment it's showing that we do expect growth in LNG supply on a summer-on-summer basis, and that's pegged at around 10 million tonnes of growth at the moment, which is going to take supply to 208 million tonnes over that 6-month period. Again, lots of variations between the countries, but you can see by far the US is going to lead the way with new projects coming online, which I'll go into in the next slide, Also, Canada, we've got Senegal and Mauritania bringing online Greater Tortue and some ramp ups of plants that came online at the end of last year in Mexico as well. We do expect growth in Malaysia to continue. As I mentioned earlier, the Bintulu plant has got additional feed gas coming in from the Kasawari and Jeren gas fields as of Q3 of last year. So we do expect utilisation rates to be boosted there. Not all positive though. We're looking at supply deteriorations from Australia and Russia due to a combination of maintenance, feed gas availability issues, and sanctions, which I'll come on to in a slide a little bit later. We're also watching Indonesia quite closely. There's 3 liquefaction plants in Indonesia, and we're hearing that some of the LNG cargoes that were due for export are now being rerouted to the domestic market due to rising gas demand in Indonesia. So definitely one to watch out for there. And also watching Norway quite closely because the Hammerfest plant will come completely offline next week until about mid-July. So that's quite deep and extensive maintenance. So that's where we get the year-over-year declines coming from in Norway. Next slides. Now, we think that North America is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of supply growth, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And here we're just showing some of the project differences that we're seeing on a summer over summer basis. And you can see the bulk of the growth is really going to come from the new project, which is Venture Global's Plaquemines project, which has ramped up 18 out of 24 trains as part of phase 1. Now, if we look at feed gas that's going into Plaquemines at the moment, it shows that actually those 18 trains are running at incredibly high utilisation rates, sometimes as much as 130 to 140% utilisation. So definitely we're seeing a lot of growth coming out of this project, and we do think the 6 trains due to come online from phase 1 will gradually come online through the summer season and add to supply. Just a note to say we don't actually have phase 2 in our balances until the middle of Q4, so something to watch out for there, whether that can come on a little bit earlier. We also see growth coming from Freeport as well. Freeport had a number of supply issues last summer, and some of those were hurricane related as well. So we expect better utilization rates from Freeport this summer, but also Freeport did start up a 1.5 MTPA debottlenecking project at the end of last year. So we could get some year-over-year growth coming from that debottlenecking project as well. We have a number of other projects coming online, including LNG Canada, which has recently brought on in a cool-down cargo, and commissioning is underway at the first train there, which is 7 MTPA. We think that LNG Canada could start exporting a cargo, or at least re-export some of the cool-down cargo in June, and then steadily ramp up through the course of Q3. We don't have train 2 coming online until the start of 2026. And then last but not least, we have Corpus Christi, 10 MTPA phase 3 at the Cheniere plant there. 3 trains are going to come online this year. We've already seen 1 train come online. It exported its first cargo in February, and commercial operations started in March. We think a second train could come online over the summer season, and a third train in Q4 as well. And then the 4 remaining trains will come online through the course of 2026. So quite a slow and gradual ramp up of that plant. You'll also see here that we do expect year-over-year decreases from Sabine Pass. This is mainly coming from the fact that we think there's going to be a bit more maintenance at Sabine Pass over this summer season. If we go on to the next slide, I'll be looking here at Australia and Russia, which is the two key areas where we're seeing or expected to see year-over-year declines in supply. Now you can see all of the project level basis forecasts that we have at the moment, and the biggest declines that we see is coming from Northwest Shelf. Here, this project has been having quite a few feed gas issues, and they've actually turned offline the second train, which was a 2.5 MTPA train at the end of last year. So feed gas availability issues really affecting Northwest Shelf as well as maintenance. And then a number of these kind of red lines here is really related around more maintenance, particularly at Ichthys, which didn't take much maintenance last summer, but we think that the project is going to come offline for a number of weeks. And in fact, both trains will come offline for a number of weeks this summer. So we do expect reductions there. And we are also hearing, as you may have seen from our latest news stories, that Ichthys is facing some production issues at the moment. So some downside risks to the forecast there. In terms of Russia, lots of uncertainties around Russia because at the moment we have sanctions halting 3 facilities in Russia, 2 small-scale projects, so Portovaya and Vysotsk, and then of course Arctic LNG 2, which Kpler has been tracking really closely. Now, in our base case forecast, we have these projects out of the forecast for the summer season, but as we'll go into a little bit later, there is upside risks here, particularly if sanctions are eased or dropped on Russia from the United States. So definitely one to watch as a risk. In terms of the other projects, the other major projects, this is really related around our maintenance expectations on these plants. So Yamal barely took any maintenance last summer, so we have baked in some maintenance into our forecasts as we go through the summer season, and the opposite is true for Sakhalin 2. So Sakhalin 2 went completely offline for 4 weeks last summer for quite extensive and deep maintenance, so we have more of a seasonal normal maintenance pattern in our forecasts for this summer. So that's all from the LNG supply side, and now I'm going to pass over to JP, who's going to head up the demand side.
All right, thanks, Laura. All right, so essentially the big picture here is that, unsurprisingly, if you've been following sort of ongoing market dynamics, Europe will be the primary destination for sort of flexible supply. Throughout the summer months, they pulled, a lot of gas out of storage during winter, while East Asia had a pretty mild winter, so they need to refill their stocks. And so LNG is essentially the way to do that. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So overall, we expect year-over-year demand for the summer season to increase about 10 million tons. As I just mentioned, Europe will lead the way there. So they need a lot of LNG to refill storage and to offset the loss of Russian pipeline gas. So we'll definitely see most of the flexible supply go there. We also see some incremental increases from Egypt. Egypt came back into the LNG demand market, the LNG import market, sort of mid-summer last year, mainly due to production issues, which we'll get into a little bit later, but also because of rising demand due to very hot summers. China, we see very marginal growth, and we'll get into why in the coming slides. Kuwait, a little bit of year-over-year increases and some more minor changes year-over-year for some other countries. And then the sort of big losses this year are Japan. And Japan's main reason for reducing LNG imports is because they also had a mild winter. So their LNG stocks are in a pretty good spot. They also have increased nuclear utilization. They brought a few more plants online last year. So those have ramped up a bit. And so utilization is expected to be higher going into the summer, reducing the overall need for natural gas-fired power generation. And then South Korea, we also see sort of a lower end demand scenario there, while their nuclear output is actually going to be a bit bearish this summer because of very long, extended, deep maintenance. It's going to be offset a bit, mainly because of some increases in renewable and also coal-fired power generation. And much like Japan, mild winter led to their LNG stocks being in a pretty stable position, so they just need less LNG to refill those before the upcoming winter. You can go to the next slide. So as I just discussed, Asia had a pretty mild winter this last year. Beijing saw one of the warmest winters they've ever had on record, potentially the warmest winter on record there. So overall, LNG demand was pretty weak going into winter and coming out of winter. So overall, LNG storage in those countries is in a very favorable position. So there's a little bit more supply available to go into Europe that would have potentially normally been destined for Asia. And so you can see here on the left, our 2025 forecast for how hot we think the summer is going to be, though. And we do expect a pretty hot summer all across the board in Asia. The only big differences sort of are in Thailand, where things have been kind of cool at the start of the summer. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then Korea, also not too bad. But Japan, we expect to have a very hot summer, well above the 5-year average. China also be quite hot, and India also be quite hot. So there'll be some increased demand from those countries. Though Japan, as we discussed, will be mitigated a little bit more by the fact that they've got some additional nuclear utilization online. And then over to the right there is a graph showing our projected LNG demand for these countries going into the summer. So just sort of showing the differences between the last few years. Japan will be a bit lower. We already kind of discussed why. Same thing with Korea. Taiwan will be up a little bit, and that's largely because they're taking their last nuclear power facility offline. It's very old. It's just getting mothballed. So they're going to need more LNG to replace that loss of power generation. And so they're going to bring in more. And also their third LNG import terminal supposedly is starting commissioning right now and should be at least partially able to come into service in the coming weeks and to increase utilization there. As we said before, China, very incremental increase in demand, which the next slides will kind of cover that. Same thing with India, and then Thailand we think will be a little bit lower. Next slide. So as promised, here is our sort of view on China. So summer-wise, we think there'll be a pretty modest increase in demand of about 9 BCM. Um, the that increase in demand will be met mostly by non-LNG natural gas sources. So that is domestic production and pipeline gas from Russia. So the Power of Siberia pipeline came fully online late last year. And so it now can have a full year of full utilization, bringing gas down to those big markets like Shanghai, which is the ultimate destination of that system. So be it increased pipeline gas, and then also China's had some pretty impressive year-over-year growth in domestic gas production. So that'll also help cut into the need for LNG there. So we have only about 6 BCM of, in that 6 BCM stack there, only about 1 BCM is going to come from LNG. And the discrepancy between the demand and supply is just sort of a balancing kind of issue there with like flexible supply and stuff like that. But the ratio we believe will basically remain true to that, what we have in the graph there. So pretty modest increase in demand from China, but still a little bit. Next slide. So looking at Japan, Korea, Taiwan, we've already touched onto the reasons why demand is doing what it's doing there, but now we can see it a little bit more visually. So in Japan, you can see the increased utilization of nuclear plants, particularly during the sort of midsummer there. It'll be quite a bit higher than last summer. So that'll really cut into the need for gas-fired power generation. In Korea, we have a little bit of increased demand in sort of the midsummer months for LNG. It's largely because of it's supposed to be very hot. But we do think that a lot of the sort of potential incremental increases in demand that would have been from LNG will be mainly made up by renewables and coal. And then we also have Taiwan, as I explained before, they took their last nuclear facility offline, so they're going to need a little bit more LNG to compensate. And you can see that that third regas facility, we have it coming online in June partially, and so that utilization rate will increase and allow them to bring in a little bit more LNG. As right now they're pretty capped out on utilization at their existing facilities, which are they're performing well above nameplate capacity at the moment. Next slide. So just kind of looking at the LNG inventories side of things. So we recently started projecting and doing a nowcast for LNG inventories in Japan and Korea. Later this year, this will be on the platform, but it is in our current sort of weekly and monthly reports. But basically, what you can see here is that for the most part, both Japan and South Korea, their inventories of LNG are well above the 5-year average. Um, we think sort of midsummer, Japan will kind of decrease a little bit because it's going to be very hot there. But we think instead of importing more LNG, they'll probably just pull it out of stocks. And then they'll see a little bit of refilling coming towards the end of the year. And then South Korea, we pretty much think they're going to maintain, sort of in between the 5-year average and the top end of the 5-year range in terms of their LNG inventories. It's going to be a pretty strong place for them to be. So they're just going to need less LNG to fill up before the upcoming winter. Next slide. Looking at a couple other markets, we have India. We think that because it's going to be pretty hot in India, they're going to need a little bit more LNG than they did last year. There's also some year-over-year growth in the industrial sector, particularly fertilizers. So those two things come together will, add a little bit of incremental demand this summer, but nothing too much, about 0.3 million tons. We think demand in Thailand will decrease a little bit going into this summer because it'll actually be a little bit cooler than expected, and also be a little bit cooler in its neighbors Myanmar and Laos, which export hydropower to Thailand. So there'll be less of a need for gas-fired power generation. And additionally, which one of the big drivers for increased Thai LNG imports has been difficulty increasing and stabilizing natural gas production. Production some more came online last year and coming into this year, so and it looks pretty stable for now. So we think the sort of overall decline there is going to lessen a bit in this sort of summer period. So they'll need a little bit less than expected on the LNG side of things. Next slide. And then Egypt, the big story in the Middle East this year is when it comes to LNG. As I mentioned before, they've really lost a lot of production. If you look at December 24 versus December 23, they lost about a BCFD of gas production, very, very substantial. So they went from being a net LNG exporter to a net LNG importer. And obviously, they were importing a lot of pipeline gas from their neighbors, Israel and then Jordan, but that's basically just Israeli gas also. But some of that's regasified LNG. So basically, going into this summer, we think production will stabilize somewhat. There's been some ongoing drilling there by the big 3 IOCs, so BP, Shell, and Eni. So Shell has already completed some of its drilling activities at their West Delta Deep Marine field. They're planning to begin drilling another new phase there. So that combines about 300 MMCFD of production. You have some infill wells being drilled at the Raven field, which is part of BP's West Nile Delta project. That's hopefully going to stabilize production at about 600. Right now, it's a bit below 400. And then there's some infill wells being drilled at Zohr as well, and those will hopefully add another couple hundred MMCFD. But the sort of overarching structural decline that we've seen in Egyptian gas production will basically make it so that new gas supply that's coming online there will just sort of flatten the curve out, which is definitely a good thing, as it's a pretty dramatic decrease in production if you look at the data from the past couple of years. So overall, we think Egypt will import about 6-ish million tons, like overall this year, and this summer about 3.8. And some of that will be directly imported into Egypt. Some of it will be imported via Jordan, though the FSRU that's currently located in Jordan is actually going to, after some maintenance, be stationed in Egypt, where it will ultimately replace the FSRU that's there now, as that lease ends in early 2026. There's also a third FSRU coming to Jordan this summer to help sort of bolster regas capacity to make sure that there's enough going into what is expected to be a very, very hot summer period. Next slide. And now I'll pass it over to my colleague Ron to go over the European side of the market.
Thank you, JP. I hope everyone's doing well. So yeah, when it comes to Europe, I guess like the best way to describe what our view for this summer is that the region will be facing a tighter balance. especially when compared to what happened in 2024. And this will be despite the availability of LNG supply that will be like higher this summer, and the likelihood of having like increased flexibility in terms of refilling gas storage, as has been currently discussed at the European level. So, but of course, this is the consequence of having ended winter at low levels in terms of gas storage compared to the last couple of years. So like this will put like pressure for European market players to like import more LNG in the European market, and that's gonna be tightening the balance. But of course, we also have like pipeline dynamics. So we're gonna go into all these details from the next slide, please. And I guess the best way to start with this conversation is by looking at what our expectation is in terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the European Union. So on the left-hand chart, you have like aggregate demand, which in our definition is basically the sum of domestic consumption in the European Union plus net injections into gas storage facilities. So in here, we're expecting to see an overall increase in EU aggregate demand of about 5 BCM during this summer. Let's again remember that our summer definition goes from the beginning of April to the end of September. So this increase will be mainly driven by overall like higher injections into gas storage facilities, which we're expecting it to be around 8 BCM increase year on year compared to the summer 2024. We are also expecting a reduction of around 2 BCM in terms of domestic consumption at the European Union level, which will be driven mostly by losses coming from the power sector, especially because we're expecting to have increased electricity generation from renewables, particularly from solar, which is kind of like the same trend that we were expecting, that we saw like in 2024. So like we're expecting that trend to continue this year. So when it comes to aggregate supply, which our definition for that is the sum of domestic production, LNG imports and pipeline imports, we're of course expecting 5 BCM increase of that like during the summer period. And really the main driver here of this increase is additional LNG imports that again will be needed for Europe to weather this tighter balance that we'll be facing. So in here, we're expecting to have like a net increase of 15 BCM compared to the previous summer season. We're expecting to have marginal increases in terms of production. And really, like the main loss will be coming from net pipeline imports. And to dive into that, we're going to next slide, please. And in here, so this almost like 10 BCM of losses that we're having summer on summer. Basically, if we have to talk more about this, we have in terms of like aggregate volumes coming from Algeria, Libya, and Azerbaijan, we do see kind of like stable trend like summer on summer. We do see also like a slight reduction in Norwegian exports to the European Union. This is despite the fact that our view is that we're going to have a lighter maintenance in Norway, but like this decrease is actually coming from the fact that we're expecting the natural decrease in production in Norway to outweigh this lighter maintenance that we're expecting. So when it comes to the main source of losses for pipeline imports, of course, it's like the loss of Russian gas supply via Ukraine that we had at the very beginning of this year. And that in our base case, we're not expecting for this gas to make it back during this summer season. And we're gonna elaborate more on that in a few minutes. But like another aspect that is also tightening the balance in Europe in terms of pipeline are exports to Ukraine. As you can see on the right-hand chart, of course, Ukraine has imported gas before from the European Union, but like most of these volumes were really part of this short-haul scheme and or customs warehouse regimes, as to which Ukraine would import this gas into the territory. these were mostly like European gas players kind of like putting gas in Ukraine, right? So like some of this gas would make it back like immediately into the European Union, or some of that gas would also like stay there like stored for a few months or even like up to 3 years. So, but like this year, the situation is quite different. So like this year, Ukraine is importing a lot of volume from the European Union, basically to cover their domestic needs. And this is because in February, they had attacks on the upstream infrastructure that basically reduced the capacity of the country to produce natural gas. So like they have been slowly recovering those losses, but like basically that's tightening the balance in Ukraine. So like in our base case, we're expecting for Ukraine to recover this production around July, and yeah, we're expecting storage levels in Ukraine to reach 8 BCM by the end of this summer season. This that said, like this will likely not be enough for Ukraine to go through the next winter season. That's why in our base case, we're expecting Ukraine to rely still on imports from the European Union, as it was the case in February this year. Next slide, please. A factor that has been actually bringing bearishness to the European market has been all the discussion around the flexibility in terms of refilling targets. As you know, the European gas storage regulation states that member countries should reach 90% target in terms of storage levels. However, when we account for the derogations that are included in this document, we could see that this target could go to as low as 78%, and countries would be still basically complying with the regulation. But like the current conversation that has been taking place in recent weeks is comes after the European Commission submitted a proposal basically giving more flexibility to market players in this regard. This proposal was amended by the Council of the European Union, which actually added more flexibility to the one that the European Commission had added. And then basically yesterday we had like a release from one of the committees in the European Parliament that stated or confirmed the fact that we are expecting to see more flexibility coming into the amendments for the European gas storage regulation. This committee established like a floor for when accounting for derogations in terms of like unfavorable market conditions that could go to as low as 75%. So in our view, basically all these amendments really have the objective to kind of like change the market sentiment around like the restocking season. So this will very likely change the seasonal spread and make it more profitable for market players to actually store gas in the restocking season. For Kpler Insight, basically our expectation is that by the end of October, the European Union will be reaching 82% of storage levels. This will imply that we're going to have like a net injection of 50 BCM between the beginning of April and the end of October. So, but for the actual summer season, we are expecting to have 45 BCM of net injections. If we go to the next slide, please. And a lot of our clients have asked us, well, would this imply that basically the fact that the European Union will have to import more LNG during the summer season, would this bring any risk of like having congestion at some European terminals? And based on the analysis that we have conducted in recent weeks, basically we see very little risk for that to happen. And the answer to that, you have it on the left-hand chart, in which we can see how the LNG regasification capacity at the European Union has been increasing, particularly since the beginning of the energy crisis in 2022. So we have added until until the expectation for this 2025 is like almost 50 MTPA of additional capacity. And of course, the reality changes depending on the country you're talking about. Like some countries were expecting them actually to have like high utilization rates this summer season, and that's the case of like Poland, Croatia, the Netherlands, etc., and even Italy that had like really a change in the supply structure now that we don't have Russian gas supply via Ukraine. But like overall, the takeaway here is that European gas terminals, regasification terminals, will be able to import the LNG volumes that they need without like having like risk of congestion going forward in the summer season. Next slide, please. But of course, as in any outlook, there are risks to this view. And I guess like this year, it's quite busy in terms of all these macro conversations, in terms of like tariffs, geopolitics, and weather, etc. So like we have listed actually, our risks on the next slide that we have categorized based on like whether they're bearish or bullish to our view, and we have ordered them based on the impact that they could have. So on the bearish side, like the main risk that we see is a potential return of Russian gas supply, both for pipeline and LNG. So with this, in terms of pipeline supply, this could amount to 6 BCM during the summer season. And for LNG supply, this could go to 5 million tons. Like, of course, we have like other bearish factors, for example, like the impact of tariffs, and especially on Asian LNG demand, or like a faster ramp up at US Plaquemines that, as you saw, like it's been doing quite well since it commissioned. And on the bullish side, we have like higher needs from Ukraine, especially if the country doesn't manage to restore gas production going forward, like in the next few months. This could amount to like up to 3 BCM on top of what it's already importing from the European Union. And as usual, we have like the typical risk in terms of unplanned outages in existing LNG facilities, or delays that could take place in facilities that we're expecting to come online in the next few months, for example, LNG Canada. And lastly is the possibility of having the hottest summer on record in parts of Asia, which could add bullishness to the market. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to start talking about the potential comeback of Russian gas supply via Ukraine in the short term. Just to make it clear, so far, we are not very positive about this possibility. In our base case, we only consider the Turk Stream pipeline to be functioning in the next few months. That said, like we expect this pipeline to be operating at a higher utilization rate compared to last summer. Our average utilization rate is around 88% when accounting for the period of maintenance that usually takes place in June. But apart from that, in terms of Russian gas supply via Ukraine, we're not positive on that, basically because we believe that the conditions for that to happen are not met yet. And for us, we need to see like more progress when it comes to guaranteeing the future security of Ukraine going forward, and also like more involvement in terms of the engagement of the European Union in this conversation that so far has been not as important as the role of the US in crafting this. But like apart from that, we also see that we're lacking in the region political support for that, even if there are like some countries that are quite vocal about this return, for example, in the case of Hungary and Slovakia. And just to make it clear too, other routes that we have, like say via Poland or the Nord Stream pipelines, we are not expecting that to happen like during this summer. Many reasons to that, like, but basically political will of the stakeholders involved is not there yet, and also like infrastructure issues taking place. But also when it comes to the legal aspect of this, like we know that contracts basically held by European players with Gazprom have already expired or are going through like arbitrations. So like this will limit the possibility to see some of these volumes back. But like assuming that some of them ultimately could come back if Ukraine accepts transiting these volumes. The scenario that we're putting here is that volumes could come back in June, for example. Like this is because the negotiations are not there yet, so like we're giving like some more time for that to happen. And basically what we're expecting is that some of the volumes that were rerouted that will end up in Hungary, that were rerouted via the Turk Stream pipeline, will be again like going back via Ukraine, and also will be Slovakia that will be playing like a very important role here, basically using the SPP contract that with Gazprom to import volumes and potentially using some of those volumes to resell them on the spot market. In a similar situation to what we saw in the aftermath of the OMV Gazprom saga in November 2024. So all in all, we're expecting that this could amount to 6 BCM if it happens, so which will be bearish for our outlook. With this, I'll pass over to Laura to talk about other bearish risks.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Just following on from the Russian gas story, we've also been looking at Russian LNG as well, and the potential in the future to potentially have an easing of US sanctions on Russian LNG plants. Lots of uncertainties around this one, but if it did happen, we could see the restart of at least 9 MTPA of capacity that is idled at the moment. So the capacity that we're looking that could start up immediately is basically Arctic LNG Train 1. This is the facility that did start exporting last year, but then shut down. We have been using satellites to track what's been happening at this facility. And in recent weeks, we have seen flaring at the facility. Basically, they're checking all of the operations and making sure everything's running okay, and also filling the tanks back up to full capacity. So if sanctions are suddenly eased or dropped, we could definitely see this capacity coming back online very quickly, because there's a lot of LNG in storage, and there's also lots of tankers that could be used to load this LNG. So many conventional and ARC4 tankers that can be used to load once the ice fades later on in the summer as well. We have also been watching from satellite again what's been happening at Arctic LNG Train 2. You'll remember that there is a power plant that has been supplied to the project over the past couple of months. And in recent weeks, they have also started flaring at the Train 2 facility. So commissioning is now underway, but we believe that's going to take a number of weeks, if not months, to commission the facility. So we wouldn't see that actually being able to technically start up until around Q3 or around the middle of the year. We also have capacity, as I mentioned previously, in the Baltics, 2 small-scale projects, Portovaya and Vysotsk, which could start up operations. And we imagine that LNG storage tanks are quite full there as well. Now, in the all-time high scenario for Russian LNG coming back this summer, we think up to 5 million tons could come back, although it would likely be much lower than that, because for that 5 million tons to come back, we would need to see an easing of sanctions or a dropping of sanctions very, very soon, which is unlikely to happen. But we are showing our high side scenario here. So just over 3 million tons could come back from Arctic LNG Train 1 and 2 starting up around the middle of the year. We have Portovaya and Vysotsk. And then, of course, we can't forget the volumes that are in the 2 FSUs in Murmansk and in Kamchatka. tracker. This is volumes that was originally exported from Arctic LNG Train 1 and basically couldn't find a home. So there is volume in those FSUs at the moment, which could be made available to the market as well. So one that we're going to be watching very closely over the summer season. I'm now going to pass over to JP, who's going to head through tariffs and temperatures.
So a lot of uncertainty about tariffs, but the sort of one country that has not received any relief whatsoever from U.S. tariffs has been China. But, sort of looking at the broad impact of what tariffs might do to, various economies in Asia is, we're still considering it. Who knows what's going to happen in the coming weeks? So much variability in the decision-making process. So on the graph on the left there, the yellow bars are GDP forecasts or base case, sort of tariff agnostic forecasts of GDP for several countries. Nothing too surprising here. China basically hitting its 5% mark as they, are wont to do. They'll make it happen no matter how much money they have to spend. They want to hit their target. India with some big growth there, and then kind of, more normal kind of nominal growth from the other countries on the scene there. And these countries were picked because these 6 countries make up about 90% of Asian LNG demand. So we worked with our macro team and we put together sort of the lowest GDP case we could sort of put together and for these countries, and that's what that blue bar is. So Thailand, Taiwan, there's no bar because it's 0%, but sort of the big ticket here is China. So that's a pretty sizable reduction from 5% to 2% when you're talking about a country that large or such a huge economy. So how will these lower GDP forecasts, this like lowest of the low case that we've put together, how will that actually impact LNG demand? And if you look at the graph on the right, it's pretty limited for most of these countries, with the exception for China. And a lot of that is from the non-power sector. So that's pretty much industrial output. Industrial output and GDP are very closely tied, especially in China. So you lower GDP, you're going to lower industrial output, and therefore lower demand for LNG there. So this like super low GDP case, we think could potentially cut about 4 million tons of LNG demand in East Asia, which would be good news for Europe, who would probably gladly take those volumes, provided the price is right. Next slide. So we have the GDP side of things. So what about a hot summer? So this is the other sort of big risk factor in East Asia. We are already expecting a pretty hot summer there. It's been, summers have been trending hotter in most major metropolitan areas across many regions of the world. But in Asia, that has definitely been the case as well. So we look at the graph on the left there, and you can see the sort of 3 cases. We have the base case is what we think weather's going to be like there. And then there's a low case and a high case, and they're basically just the top end and the low end of the 5-year range. You can see in Japan, we're already expecting a pretty hot summer. So the base case and the high case are essentially the same. Same thing for India, same thing for China. There's a little bit more of a variance for some of the other countries, but it's mainly that low case. That's where a lot of the change is. So if you look at that middle graph, that's sort of how we think and have calculated LNG demand will change if we get that really hot summer. And so, unsurprisingly, we don't think Japan and China will change that much because our base case is already pretty close to the high case. But Thailand's is sort of the outsized factor here. They, we talked about it earlier in the demand section, but they've had a very cool start to their sort of warmer months. And that's supposed to persist going into the summer. So the high case for them is quite a bit higher comparatively. But really the big impact would be if they have a pretty mild summer, so low end of the 5-year range. And so you can see on the graph on the right there, that's about 4 million tons of total LNG demand that would be, basically erased this summer. So somewhat similar to the GDP case, almost in terms of total amount. Obviously, it's not the same countries that are taking the lion's share of that demand reduction, but be mostly Japan taking that big loss in demand there. So now, why don't we see what these cases are like when you put them together? So if you go to the next slide. So the only case of these, which is unsurprising, um, that sees a net increase in demand would be if you have your hot summer. The hottest summer, I mean, out of the 5-year range at least. And that's only equates to about 0.7 million tons. So very, very minor when you're looking at importers as large as China, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. But there's a lot of downside risk. So, lowest GDP plus coolest summer, which is like, the lowest of the low, like super bearish case, could see about 7.5 million tons of LNG demand being pulled out of Asia. And this would, of course, be very positive for Europe. They're, as Ron touched on already, there's already like a lot of work being done by the EU Commission to maybe loosen targets a bit to help with prices, and so hopefully actually maybe increase the amount of storage they'd get otherwise by just making things less tight and putting a little less emphasis on we need this gas now. So by having that kind of additional supply basically available for Europe, that would be good for them. This would of course not be great for LNG sellers, as prices would probably have to be pretty low as a result of this. So there's a lot of downside risk going into the summer, and not really a lot of upside risk on the demand side in Asia. So you can go to the next slide. And so that's what we have in terms of material today. So the overall sort of summary of everything, if we can boil all of this down into 3 main points, is that we're expecting about 10 million tons of LNG supply growth going into the summer, with most of that coming from the US, predominantly Plaquemines, from North America, predominantly Plaquemines, and then also LNG Canada towards midsummer, and a little bit from Corpus Christi Stage 3. Europe will be the place to put LNG this summer. They're going to need a lot of LNG to refill those stocks. Ukraine obviously is an open question in terms of how much gas they're going to need, and realistically, Europe is going to be the conduit for a lot of that gas. So, but we think Europe's where a lot of that flexible supply is going to end up. And then, of course, there's just simply a ton of risk going into the summer, predominantly tariffs, general geopolitics with Russia, and also weather. Really, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk factors going on now, but I guess we will approach them as they come. So thank you very much for joining us. I'll pass it back to Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, JP and Ron, for all your insights. It's really great to hear them all. We have a couple of minutes now for questions, so probably enough time for one question each. One of the questions that's come through is, do your US LNG projections consider the current tariff war? Maybe that's one for JP.
Yeah, so currently, no. Given that energy is broadly exempt from many of the tariffs, we don't think the current tariffs in place will have too much of an impact on LNG exports, at least going into the summer. And at the end of the day, Europe is so hungry for LNG this summer that we think that exports out of the US will be largely unaffected over the next few months. Longer term, it's a different question. And that's more of like project approval, not even approval, just like projects being able to get financing and things like that. But for this summer period, don't think it will be impacting supply too much.
Okay, great. And one for Ronald on Ukraine. So what are the main routes to bring gas from Europe into Ukraine? And I suppose, where is that gas going to come from as well? Is that, domestically sourced gas, or is that LNG?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, quite interesting. So basically, in terms of like options, Ukraine can import via Poland, via Slovakia, via Hungary, which has been doing so for a long time now, and also via the Trans-Balkan stream. So basically, in terms of like Poland, this is a route that we think it's going to be used quite a lot. Yeah, because this is the access of like LNG that will enter Lithuania and then like could actually reach Poland and then like be imported by Ukraine there. So like the problem with this is that this route only has like up to around 0.2 BCM per month of capacity. So like it means that Ukraine will need to like pull gas from other sources. And yeah, in our view, this will continue to be like from Hungary. Hungary is set to be playing like this very important role in the CE region, since the country, has the flexibility and the capacity to export more. And of course, the Budince interconnection point with Slovakia will be a point in which Ukraine, we expect, will be using quite a lot to get gas via Slovakia. That will likely also come from like LNG that would be imported via, for example, German terminals or like other parts of Northwestern Europe. And lastly, on the southern piece, I feel like it's like Greek terminals that could be playing like a very interesting role there. However, the performance of Alexandropolis so far is kind of like disappointing. So like maybe limited capacity for Ukraine to import LNG via that route. But yeah, all in all, is basically tightening the balance of the CEE region going forward.
Great, thank you, Ron. We are up for time now. We only had an hour scheduled. So thank you, Ronald. Thank you, JP, for all of your time and your insights. I hope everyone found it really useful. And if you would like to reach out to the Insights team, you have our email address here, insights@kpler.com. We produce lots of weekly and monthly reports and lots of balances on global LNG, European gas, and also US gas markets. So please reach out to us at some point if you are interested in talking about the markets. Hope you found it useful. Thanks for your time. Bye.